My name is Carla T. Schroyer, and I am 20 years old. I returned home for Thanksgiving expecting turkey, family arguments, and my mother asking invasive questions about college. Instead, I found an empty house, a stolen $8,000, and a message from my father that ended with 2 words: have fun. I flew from Denver to Ohio on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. The sky was the familiar color of dirty steel, and half-melted snow covered the runway. I had been away at school since August, balancing classes with part-time work and stretching every dollar until it nearly tore. Still, coming home had always made the struggle feel temporary. Grandpa Harold was waiting at the airport with a handwritten sign, "Carla, unpaid farmhand." I laughed before I even reached him. He hugged me once, took my suitcase, and complained during the drive about people forgetting how to handle snow. Grandpa rarely spoke without purpose. Even his jokes felt like warnings wrapped in dry humor. The house looked abandoned when we arrived. There were no lights, wreaths, or cars in the driveway. Inside, there was no smell of turkey, cinnamon, or coffee. No football game echoed from the living room. The silence felt deliberate, as if someone had removed every sign that I belonged there. I checked my phone. Dad had sent a message 3 hours earlier. "We spent your $7,000 on a family vacation. Have fun." Attached was a photograph of Mom, Dad, my younger brother Dylan, and our dog standing in front of a Maui resort. They wore matching Hawaiian shirts and sunglasses. My parents held cocktails, while Dylan grinned beside a sign reading Maui 2025. For almost a minute, I believed it had to be a joke. "Grandpa," I said, handing him the phone. He studied the photograph without changing expression. Then he said, "We'll show them where the crabs winter." I had not heard that phrase since childhood, but I remembered what it meant. Someone had crossed a line. The next morning, Grandpa woke me before sunrise. He placed a cup of coffee and a yellow legal pad in front of me. "Write down every dollar you saved this summer. Dates, jobs, amounts, and where you kept it." That was when fear settled into my stomach. I had worked 2 jobs all summer and saved $8,170. Most of it was cash hidden in a sealed envelope inside an old storage box in my bedroom. I distrusted online banking after an account problem the previous year, and I believed my room at home was safe. I ran upstairs. The box was open. The envelope was gone. My old softball trophies had been moved. Several drawers were disturbed, and empty spaces on the shelf showed that other belongings had disappeared too. I returned downstairs, holding the empty envelope. They took all of it. Grandpa did not curse or raise his voice. He simply looked at the envelope, then at the list I had written. "This is no longer a family disagreement," he said. "This is theft." He made 3 calls before lunch. One was to a former sheriff's deputy named Ed. Another was to Arthur, an elderly attorney Grandpa knew from poker games. The third was to Benny, a man whose role Grandpa refused to explain. By dinner, folders covered the kitchen table. Grandpa moved through the paperwork with the calm precision of someone repairing machinery. He asked about my summer employers, whether anyone knew where I stored the money, and the last time I had spoken to Mom about Thanksgiving. They thought they were leaving behind the boring daughter and the old man, he said. I watched him place my father's name at the top of a clean sheet of paper. "What are you planning?" Grandpa looked up. "I'm planning to teach them the difference between being forgiven and getting away with something." Outside, snow began falling again. My family was drinking on a beach with money I had earned by working until my hands blistered. They had no idea Grandpa had just declared war. The next morning, I woke to the sound of metal keys striking paper. Not a laptop keyboard, a typewriter. Grandpa had dragged an ancient machine down from the attic, the kind that looked as if it had survived 2 wars and several government investigations. He sat at the kitchen table in a flannel shirt, typing with 2 fingers while steam rose from a chipped coffee mug beside him. 3 folders lay open across the table. One contained my summer pay stubs. Another held old property records and tax documents. The third contained the list I had written showing exactly how I earned the $8,170 that had disappeared from my bedroom. Grandpa slid a finished page toward me. It was addressed to my father. There were no insults or threats, only facts. The letter explained where I had worked, how much I saved, where the cash had been stored, and how the exact amount disappeared immediately before the family left for Maui. "You're not accusing them directly?" I asked. "I don't need to," Grandpa replied. "Guilty people hear accusations in plain facts." By noon, he had mailed certified copies of the letter to Dad's accountant, his employer, and the country club where he spent weekends pretending he was wealthier than he really was. I stared at the receipts. Why send it to them? Because your father respects embarrassment more than morality. Those letters were only warning shots. Next, Grandpa drove me to the bank. He helped me open an account that required both our signatures for any major withdrawal. He deposited $100 and told me it was not about the money. It establishes a clean record from today forward. Afterward, we stopped at a garage behind a small print shop owned by Grandpa's friend Kenny. Kenny had a gray beard, ink-stained fingers, and the amused expression of someone who enjoyed questionable projects as long as they were technically legal. Grandpa asked him to print several save-the-date cards for an early 75th birthday party. The guest list included neighbors, church members, poker friends, and nearly every person Mom tried to impress. I still did not understand the purpose. Grandpa only said, "Some lessons need witnesses." That evening, he cooked canned fish with onions and poured himself a small glass of whiskey. Then he told me something I had never heard before. Dad had stolen money as a teenager. Quarters from ashtrays, bills from jacket pockets, small amounts that were easy to dismiss. "He always said he'd put it back," Grandpa said. "Then the amount got bigger." "Why didn't you stop him?" "I thought time would." His face tightened. I was wrong. The following afternoon, I posted the Maui photograph on social media. My caption read, "Glad my family is enjoying my tuition money." Within an hour, relatives began sharing it. My phone exploded. Mom demanded that I delete the post. Dad accused me of exaggerating. Dylan left a voicemail saying, "I did not understand how hard our parents worked and that I always acted like a victim." I ignored them all. 3 hours later, they called Grandpa. I sat across from him while he answered. He said very little. Mostly, he listened. Then he looked directly at me and said into the phone, "Return every $1, or I press send." He ended the call. "What are you sending?" Grandpa pointed toward a folder beside the typewriter. "IRS contact sheet." My stomach tightened. He was not bluffing. Dad sent an email the next morning titled, "Clarification." He claimed they believed I was not coming home for Thanksgiving and assumed the money in my room was leftover cash from high school. 2 weeks earlier, Mom had asked whether I preferred pumpkin or pecan pie. Grandpa printed the email, folded it once, and placed it inside a red folder. The label read IDIOTS. Then Aunt Linda sent me a screenshot. It showed a conversation with Mom. Mom admitted finding the cash during a deep cleaning of my bedroom. In the same message, she complained about putting my old softball trophies online for sale because I had left them behind. I handed Grandpa the screenshot. He read it twice. Then he walked to the kitchen cabinet and removed an old wooden ledger from a dusty cigar box. It contained records from the farm equipment business he once owned. He opened to a clean page and wrote, "People who no longer exist." Underneath, he added Dad's name, then Mom's. After a moment, he added Dylan's. That afternoon, Grandpa called his bank and canceled the automatic payments he had secretly been making toward my parents' mortgage. Then he called his financial advisor. "I want them removed as beneficiaries," he said. The advisor asked whether he was certain. Grandpa looked at me. "Leave everything to Carla." My breath caught. "I don't want their inheritance." "It was never theirs," he replied. "They just assumed it was." Before sunset, a formal demand letter from Arthur was ready. It gave my parents 3 business days to return the stolen money before we pursued claims involving theft, fraud, and unlawful entry into my private property. The letter was delivered to their resort. Less than 24 hours later, their Maui vacation ended early. A black SUV pulled into the driveway while snow fell around it. Mom, Dad, and Dylan stepped out, looking sunburned, exhausted, and terrified. Grandpa remained seated in his recliner. He did not rise to greet them. He simply turned another page in his catalog and waited for the lies to begin. Dad knocked 3 times, hard enough to make the old door shake. Grandpa remained in his recliner, calmly flipping through a fishing catalog as though 3 sunburned fugitives had not just arrived in his driveway. I opened the door. Mom walked in first without waiting for permission. Dad followed, holding Arthur's demand letter in one hand. Dylan entered last, avoiding my eyes. No one said hello. "We need to speak with your grandfather," Dad announced. "He can hear you." Grandpa turned another page. Dad cleared his throat. "This situation has been exaggerated. We panicked after seeing Carla's post, and we came home early because we want to resolve this privately." Mom immediately began crying. "We made a mistake," she said. "A terrible mistake, but we never meant to hurt anyone." "You took every dollar I earned," I replied. "We thought you weren't using it." "It was hidden inside my room." Mom pressed a tissue beneath her eyes. "I was cleaning. I found the envelope and assumed it had been forgotten." "You also tried selling my softball trophies." "That was different." "How?" She had no answer. Then Mom revealed just how desperate she had become. "We could report the money missing," she said quickly. "We could tell the police someone broke into the house while we were away. That would explain everything and give us more time." Grandpa finally looked up. "If you lie to the police about stealing from your own daughter, I will personally give them your messages." The room became silent. Mom's tears stopped instantly. Grandpa stood, crossed to the desk, and placed Arthur's letter in front of Dad. "Return every cent," he said, "or Carla presses send." Dad glanced toward the folders marked IRS and Sheriff's Department. His face lost what little color the Maui sun had left behind. "Can we have a few days?" "You have until Monday." Dad tried to negotiate, but Grandpa had already returned to his chair. Mom turned toward me. "Carla, please, you know your grandfather listens to you." "I'll think about it." I did not. They left with promises that the money would be restored immediately. Monday arrived without a transfer. Mom sent one message. "It was a difficult weekend. Please give us more time." Grandpa read it, opened the desk drawer, and removed both envelopes. He placed them beside my coffee and handed me a pen. "I won't do this behind your back," he said. "You decide." I asked him to wait until noon the following day, not because I wanted to protect them. I wanted to know how far they would take the lie. I texted Dad. "You have until noon tomorrow. After that, the first letter is sent." Tuesday morning passed in complete silence. At 11:50, Dylan called. He was sobbing so hard I could barely understand him. After several seconds, he handed the phone to Dad. "We don't have all of it," Dad admitted. "How much do you have?" "About $3,000. "What happened to the rest?" "The resort bill. Excursions. Your mother damaged a rental scooter." I closed my eyes. "Did you take the money from my room?" Silence. "Dad, answer me." "Yes." The word ended every remaining doubt. I walked into the kitchen carrying my phone. Grandpa sat at the table beside the envelopes. "Send the first one," I said. He did not ask whether I was sure. At 12:04, the IRS letter was sent by certified mail. I texted Dad 2 words. One down. At 2 that afternoon, my parents returned. Mom was crying before she reached the porch. Dad looked as though he had not slept since leaving Hawaii. Dylan remained in the SUV. They did not attempt to enter this time. "We will repay everything," Dad said. "Please ask him to stop the letter." Grandpa sat behind me, drinking coffee. "Pay Carla in full today," he said. Dad began explaining transfer limits and bank delays. Grandpa raised one hand. "Today." They left again. At 6:43 that evening, Dad returned with a thick envelope. Inside was $5,000 in cash. I counted every bill while he stood in the cold. The remaining 3,170 will be here Thursday, he said. I closed the door without thanking him. Grandpa removed $500 from the envelope and handed it back to me, for the trouble. Then he carried the second envelope onto the porch and placed it beside his chair. We hold this one for now. Thursday morning arrived with gray skies and the smell of snow. At exactly 10:27, Dad texted. We have the rest. Please let us in. Mom and Dad stood outside holding a plain white envelope. Inside was $3,170. Every stolen dollar had been returned. Grandpa counted it once, nodded, and said, Now you wait. For what? Mom whispered. You'll find out Sunday. They left without another word. That evening, Grandpa handed me a folder containing his newly revised will. I was now the sole beneficiary of his savings, property, and every possession he owned. I don't need this, I said. It isn't about need. On the front of the folder he had written one sentence. Trust is a stronger legacy than money. Sunday was coming, and Grandpa had made sure the whole town would be watching. Sunday morning, Grandpa dressed as though he were attending church. He wore pressed khakis, a pale blue shirt tucked neatly into his belt, and the brown jacket with leather patches on the elbows that he reserved for funerals, legal appointments, and arguments he intended to win. But we did not go to church. We drove to the community center. The fake save-the-date cards Grandpa had ordered were not fake after all. He had mailed every one of them, announcing an early celebration for his 75th birthday. The invitation promised a potluck, lunch, cake, and an important family announcement. By noon, the parking lot was full. Neighbors arrived, carrying casseroles. Grandpa's old poker friends brought bottles hidden inside paper bags. Members of Mom's church group appeared with pies and carefully wrapped gifts. Even Pastor Collins came, wearing the concerned expression of a man who suspected he had been invited to witness something more serious than a birthday. Grandpa greeted everyone warmly. He shook hands, told old stories, and complained about the coffee. Anyone watching him would have believed this was an ordinary celebration. I knew better. The revised will sat inside a leather folder beneath the head table. My parents arrived 20 minutes late. They walked in smiling as if the previous week had never happened. Mom carried a tray of decorated cookies and hugged several church friends. Dad poured lemonade and laughed loudly at jokes that were not funny. Dylan followed them quietly. He looked at me once, then looked away. They believed returning the stolen money had ended everything. They thought Grandpa's threats had only been leverage. Mom even approached me near the buffet table. Can we please act normal today? She whispered. This is your grandfather's birthday. I looked at her carefully. You should ask him what normal means. Her smile tightened. Lunch continued. Grandpa allowed everyone to eat before making his announcement. He waited until the plates were full and the room had settled into the comfortable noise of conversation. Then he walked toward the microphone. The room quieted almost immediately. Grandpa adjusted the microphone stand and looked over the crowd. Thank you for coming, he began. Turning 75 means two things. Your knees become unreliable, and everyone suddenly becomes interested in your will. A few people laughed. Dad did not. Grandpa continued. I recently learned that getting older does not mean becoming foolish. It only means people become less careful when trying to fool you. The laughter disappeared. Mom slowly lowered her glass. Grandpa reached beneath the table and lifted the leather folder. I have officially changed my estate plan, effective immediately. Dad's face stiffened. Harold, Mom said softly. Grandpa ignored her. My savings, this house, the land, my investments, and every possession I leave behind will go to the one person in this family who did not steal from me, lie to my face, or treat my trust like an unlocked cash register. He turned toward me. Carla! A fork struck the tile floor. The sound echoed through the room. Mom gave a short laugh, as though she believed everyone else had misunderstood a joke. You cannot be serious. Grandpa looked directly at her. I have never been more serious. Dad stood. This is a private family matter. No, Grandpa said. The theft was private. The consequences are public. Whispers moved across the room. Several people turned toward my parents. Mom's church friends stopped smiling. Dad looked toward the exit, but leaving immediately would have confirmed everything Grandpa had just implied. Grandpa handed me the microphone. I had not prepared a speech. I looked at the familiar faces waiting for an explanation and said only, "Thank you, Grandpa." Then I handed the microphone back. Grandpa smiled. "Good. Now serve the cake before Joanne takes all the corner pieces." The room slowly began moving again, but the atmosphere had changed. My parents left less than 15 minutes later. There were no hugs or goodbyes. Dad walked ahead while Mom followed with her untouched cookies. Dylan paused near the door and looked back at me. For 1 second, I thought he might say something. He did not. Grandpa and I stayed until the end. We played cards with Pastor Collins, ate too much casserole, and packed the leftover cake into plastic containers. During the drive home, snow began falling in thin white lines across the windshield. Grandpa kept both hands on the steering wheel. "Revenge is not loud," he said. I looked toward him. "It is lasting." The following morning, I found him outside removing the security camera Dad had installed over the garage. Beside him sat a toolbox, 3 new locks, and a handwritten list of every account my parents could still access. The inheritance announcement had not been the ending. It was only the moment Grandpa made certain they understood what they were about to lose. The morning after Grandpa's birthday gathering, he was outside before 9, balancing on a ladder beneath the garage roof. He was removing the security camera Dad had installed the previous year. I carried 2 cups of coffee into the cold and asked why he was doing it himself. Grandpa loosened the final screw and lowered the camera into his toolbox. They lost access. He changed every lock that day, the front door, garage, back entrance, and even the small basement door. No one had used in years. Then he sat at the kitchen table with a handwritten list of everything still connected to my parents. Shared accounts, insurance policies, subscriptions, roadside assistance, automatic mortgage payments. He canceled them one by one with every call placed on speakerphone. "Yes, I'm certain," he said each time. "Remove them." At the bank, he closed the temporary joint account we had opened and created a new one entirely in my name. He transferred my recovered savings into it and told the manager no one else was authorized to access the funds. That evening, Grandpa removed an old fireproof box from the hall closet. Inside was his previous will. He opened the fireplace, placed the document on the logs, and struck a match. The paper curled inward as the flames swallowed names that had once expected to inherit everything. "You don't reward rats with cheese," he said. I watched the last page turn black. The following Friday, a Christmas card arrived from Mom. It was generic and store-bought. Inside, she had written, "We miss you. Come home for Christmas. Let's start again." There was a photograph of their tree. Dylan held a tray of cookies while our dog wore reindeer antlers. Dad stood behind them smiling as though Thanksgiving had never happened. The picture felt less like an invitation and more like evidence from a staged crime scene. Grandpa glanced at it. "Desperate people decorate early." I did not answer the card. Instead, I photographed the bare fireplace in Grandpa's living room. There were no stockings, lights, or decorations, only quiet flames behind the grate. I posted it with one sentence: "You cannot decorate over betrayal." 2 days later, Dad appeared at the door. He had no car and wore no coat, even though the temperature was below freezing. He looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of the confidence he carried when he believed everyone would obey him. Grandpa opened the door halfway. Dad did not apologize. He simply said, "You won." Grandpa shook his head. "This was never a game." Then he closed the door. The following morning, Grandpa called the county auditor and asked which documents were required to transfer property ownership. 2 days later, we sat inside a government office while he signed the deed to the house over to me. I stared at the papers. "Grandpa, you are still living here, and I intend to keep doing that. Then why transfer it now?" "Because trust should not have to wait for a funeral." When we returned home, he handed me the legal folder. A small note had been stapled to the front. Trust is a stronger legacy than money. Winter arrived hard that year. Grandpa and I did not decorate for Christmas. We roasted a chicken, watched old war movies, and argued over whether instant mashed potatoes counted as real food. My parents did not call. In January, Mom posted a photograph of herself and Dad at a charity fundraiser with a caption about never giving up on precious things. I kept scrolling. Several months later, a handwritten letter arrived from Dylan. He asked to meet for coffee. He wrote that he did not agree with everything Grandpa had done, but he finally understood why I had refused to protect them. I did not answer immediately. Dylan had laughed from Maui while I stood in an empty house. Maybe he had been manipulated. Maybe he had simply enjoyed being included. Understanding someone's regret did not require giving them immediate access to my life. Grandpa remained exactly as he had always been, quiet, watchful, and impossible to fool twice. Sometimes I caught him smiling when he saw me repairing something around the house, reviewing bills, or depositing money into the account no one else could touch. My family believed they could erase me from Thanksgiving and finance their happiness with everything I had earned. Instead, they erased themselves. From the will, from the house, from the future they assumed would always be waiting. They left me behind with an old man they believed did not matter. What they failed to understand was that Grandpa had spent his entire life learning how to survive hard winters, and when the cold finally came for them, he made sure Carla T. Schroyer was the one standing inside the warm house with the keys.